folks, and welcome to Mountain Talk here on WMMT. I'm your host, Parker Hobson. So, for all the well-known writers who have called Kentucky home, Barbara Kingsolver, Hunter S. Thompson, Robert Penn Warren, our old pal, Gurney Norman, really, there are too many to try to list. But there are few Kentucky writers out there who've been as influential as Wendell Berry. Now 91, Wendell is from Henry County in central Kentucky, and over the years he's become renowned as a highly skilled and deeply beloved poet, essayist, and novelist. He's also long been well known as a writer who's also a farmer, and he's also long been an activist about social and environmental issues, especially in more recent years, opposing things like industrial-scale farming. As a profile from the magazine The Nation described him in 2019, quote, Berry has called himself an agrarian, a pacifist, and a Christian. He has written against all forms of violence and destruction of land, communities, and human beings. And he is a writer of praise for what he admires, the quiet, mostly uncelebrated labor and affection that keep the world whole and might still redeem it, end quote. Wendell Berry's farm in Henry County sits on the banks of the Kentucky River, which of course means he's downstream from us here in East Kentucky. But back in 1984, Berry came to Whitesburg to do a poetry reading here at Appalshop, and this reading was all about the Kentucky River and what it means to be upstream and downstream from each other. And in honor of April being National Poetry Month, we begin Mountain Talk today with a special treat, a set of curated clips from that reading, which was preserved by the Appalshop Archive. As a quick note here before we get into it, the recording of one of the poems Wendell reads, called To a Siberian Woodsman, is missing a few verses in the middle, but we still thought it was worth sharing. Here is Wendell Berry reading poems here at Appalshop in August of 1984.
Thank you. This is probably going to be a quiet reading. I've been hollering matters of the utmost urgency and profundity at Gurney ever since 10 o'clock this morning. Gurney suggested that this should be a watershed event, that is, an event having to do with this watershed. It's hard to make a watershed event by intention in the other sense. I'm a downstream person in this occasion, addressing, I suppose, mainly upstream people. I suppose the general message that us downstream people have to you upstream people is, don't send us anything you don't want. But we're all downstream from something. And because it's a Kentucky River watershed occasion, I decided that I would just read poems about the Kentucky River, or that mention the Kentucky River, that have to do with it. And I don't know any better way to go about it than just to do it chronologically. If my early struggles to be a poet were available, which thank God they are not, there would be a lot of effort in evidence to try to learn to write about the Kentucky River, because the Kentucky River figured large in my life from before I remember. My people have lived in the watershed and even at Port Royal for quite a long time as things go in this country. This is just an early little glimpse. It's called The Plan. My old friend, the owner of a new boat, stops by to ask me to fish with him. And I say I will, both of us, knowing that we may never get around to it. It may be years before we're both idle again on the same day. But we make a plan, anyhow, in honor of friendship and the fine spring weather, and the new boat, and our sudden thought of the water shining under the morning fog. The quiet. The fisherman rows up the river at mid-morning, anchors outside the creek mouth. For hours he sits there in his boat, lines in the water, motionless and silent in the cool wind as a heron. The leaves have fallen. The rain has turned them pliant as water. Walking on them makes no noise. The country has taken on the quiet of the fisherman, fishing alone. Some of these are just little glimpses, just lookings up out the window or from work at the river. March snow. The morning light's whiteness that has touched the world perfectly as air. In the whitened country, under the still fall of the snow, only the river, like a brown earth, taking all falling darkly into itself, moves. I wrote quite a long time ago, almost 20 years ago, a poem about returning to Kentucky to live after an absence of living in cities and so forth, in distant places. And I wrote a poem at that time called The Return, of which I now find only a couple of parts acceptable. The last one, which I'm going to read, has been a kind of emblem, I think, of my work ever since. The whole poem was dedicated to Harry Caudle, and this last poem will continue to be, and it, I think, is in a sense emblematic of him too. In the place that is my own place, whose earth I am shaped in and must bear, there is an old tree growing, a great sycamore that is a wondrous healer of itself. Fences have been tied to it, nails driven into it, hacks and whittles cut in it, the lightning has burned it. There is no year it has flourished in that has not harmed it. There is a hollow in it that is its death, though its living brims whitely at the lip of the darkness and flows outward. Over all its scars has come the seamless white of the bark. It bears the gnarls of its history healed over. It has risen to a strange perfection in the warp and bending of its long growth. It has gathered all accidents into its purpose. It has become the intention and radiance of its dark fate. It is a fact, sublime, mystical, and unassailable. In all the country, there is no other like it. I recognize in it a principle, an indwelling, the same as itself, and greater, that I would be ruled by. I see that it stands in its place and feeds upon it and is fed upon and is native and maker. I have a little place right on the bank of the Kentucky River, too close to the bank of the Kentucky River, because the river's beginning to slip out from under it now. But I work there, and it has a window in it looking out on the river. And one fall and winter and spring, I wrote a set of poems called Window Poems. And there are a couple in there about arise on the river, a flood, that I'll read now. The river is rising, approaching the window in awful nearness. Over it the air holds a tense premonition of the water's dark body, living where yesterday things breathed. As he works through the morning, the man has trouble in the corner of his eye, whole trees turning in the channel as they go by, the currents loaded with the trash of the woods and the trash of the towns, bearing down and rising. And another, a sort of sequel to that. Rising, the river is wild. There is no end to what one may imagine whose lands and buildings lie in its reach. To one who has felt his little boat taken this way and that in the braided currents, it is beyond speech. What's the river doing? Coming up. In Port Royal, that begins a submergence of minds. Heads are darkened. To the man at work through the mornings in the long-legged cabin above the water, there is an influence of the rise that he feels in his foot soles and in his belly, even while he thinks of something else. The window looks out like a word upon the wordless, fact dissolving into mystery, darkness overtaking light. And the water reaches a height it can only fall from, leaving the tree trunks wet. It has made a roof to its rising and become a domestic thing. It lies down in its place like a horse in his stall. Facts emerge from it. Drift it is hung in the trees, stranded cans and bottles, new carving in the banks, a place of change, changed. It leaves a mystic plain in the air, a membrane of history stretched between the silt lines on the banks, a depth that for months the man will go from his window down into, knowing he goes within the reach of a dark power. Where the birds are, fish were. Thank you, Gurney. This is a longish poem, and it came about because I was looking at an article about Russia in the National Geographic, and it contained a picture of a man who might have been about my age at that time, who had a son and daughter, as I did, a woodsman in Siberia. And I suppose the plot of the poem is the realization that people as such somehow are exempted from the war-making passion, which is a much more public thing. To a Siberian woodsman, after looking at some pictures in a magazine. You lean at ease in your warm house at night after supper, listening to your daughter play the accordion. You smile with the pleasure of a man confident in his hands, resting. After a day of long labor in the forest, the cry of the saw in your head, and the vision of coming home to rest. Your daughter's face is clear in the joy of hearing her own music. Her fingers live on the keys like people familiar with the land they were born in. You sit at the dinner table late into the night with your son, tying the bright flies that will lead you along the forest streams. Over you, as your hands work, is the dream of the still pools. Over you is the dream of your silence while the east brightens, birds close by you in the trees. I have thought of you stepping out of your doorway at dawn, your son in your tracks. You go in under the overarching green branches of the forest, whose ways, strange to me, are well known to you as the sound of your own voice, or the silence that lies round you now that you have ceased to speak. And soon the voice of the stream rises ahead of you, and you take the path beside it. I have thought of the sun breaking pale through the mist over you as you come to the pool where you will fish, and of the mist drifting over the water, and of the cast fly resting light on the face of the pool. And I am here in Kentucky, in the place I have made myself in the world. I sit on my porch above the river that flows muddy and slow along the feet of the trees. I hear the voices of the wren and the yellow-throated warbler whose songs pass near the windows and over the roof. In my house, my daughter learns the womanhood of her mother. My son is at play, pretending to be the man he believes I am. I am the outbreathing of this ground. My words are its words, as the wren's song is its song. Who has invented our enmity? Who has prescribed us hatred of each other? Who has armed us against each other with the death of the world? Who has appointed me such anger that I should desire the burning of your house or the destruction of your children? Who has appointed such anger to you? Who has let loose the thought that we should oppose each other with the ruin of forests and rivers? I sit in the shade of the trees of the land I was born in. As they are native, I am native, and I hold to this place as carefully as they hold to it. I do not see the national flag flying from the staff of the sycamore, or any decree of the government written on the leaves of the walnut, nor has the elm bowed before monuments or sworn the oath of allegiance. They have not declared to whom they stand in welcome. In the thought of you, I imagine myself free of the weapons and the official hates that I have borne on my back like a hump. And in the thought of myself, I imagine you free of weapons and official hates. So that if we should meet, we would not go by each other looking at the ground like slaves sullen under their burdens, but would stand clear in the gaze of each other. There is no government so worthy as your son who fishes with you in silence beside the forest pool. There is no national glory so comely as your daughter whose hands have learned a music and go their own way on the keys. There is no national glory so comely as my daughter who dances and sings and is the brightness of my house. There is no government so worthy as my son who laughs as he comes up the path from the river in the evening for joy. I wrote the poems I was going to read from each of these books on a little piece of paper and stuck it in the book, so this is like a Cracker Jack event. I do seem to find the papers finally. And of course, the human history of these places is not always ideal. This poem is a little reminder. This is a Kentucky River bottom poem, although I don't think it says so. The grandmother. Better born than married, misled, in the heavy summers of the river bottom and the long winters cut off by snow, she would crave gentle, dainty things, a pretty little cookie or a cup of tea, but spent her days over a wood stove cooking cornbread, kittles of jole and beans, for the heavy, hungry, hard-handed men she had married and mothered, bent, past unbending by her days of labor that love had led her to. They had to break her before she would lie down in her coffin. The heron. I should say, I'm not making lots of explanatory comments or something. I reckon that you should feel perfectly free, if you want to ask me to explain something. I mean, they're clear to me. What kind of heron? A little green heron, a shite poke. The heron. While the summer's growth kept me anxious in planted rows, I forgot the river where it flowed, faithful to its way, beneath the slope where my household has taken its laborious stand. I could not reach it even in dreams. But one morning, at the summer's end, I remember it again, as though its being lifts into mind in undeniable flood. And I carry my boat down through the fog, over the rocks, and set out. I go easy and silent, and the warblers appear among the leaves of the willows, their flight like gold thread, quick in the live tapestry of the leaves. And I go on until I see crouched on a dead branch sticking out of the water a heron, so still that I believe he is a bit of drift hung dead above the water. And then I see the articulation of feather and living eye, a brilliance I receive beyond my power to make, as he receives in his great patience the river's providence. And then I see that I am seen, admitted, my silence accepted in his silence. Still as I keep, I might be a tree for all the fear he shows. Suddenly I know I have passed across to a shore where I do not live. I live on an old river landing down at about 12 miles, I suppose, from the mouth of the Kentucky River. And it's the place used to be one of those livings, one of those human livings that the country used to be full of, modest and respectable and generally courteous to the place and its human community. And it consisted of what the deed calls 12 acres more or less, a store, a coal tipple, and scattered over that 12 acres more or less, garden spots, patches for various sorts of subsistence, mainly agricultural use. And at the coal tipple, there was a grand elm that was a landmark. The coal tipple came up under it and had been there far longer than any of us. And then, of course, it took sick, as all the elms are doing now, and died. And here's a sort of memorial to that tree called the Old Elm Tree by the river. Shrugging in the flight of its leaves, it is dying. Death is slowly standing up in its trunk and branches like a camouflaged hunter. In the night, I am wakened by one of its branches, crashing down, heavy as a wall, and then lie sleepless, the world changed. That is a life I know the country by. Mine is a life I know the country by. Willing to live and die, we stand here, timely and at home, neighborly as two men. Our place is changing in us as we stand, and we hold up the weight that will bring us down. In us, the land enacts its history. When we stood, it was beneath us and was the strength by which we held to it and stood. The daylight over it, a mighty blessing we cannot bear for long. This is a wedding anniversary poem, and it's another Kentucky River poem because my marriage began on the Kentucky River and remains there. 17 years. They are here again, the locusts I baited my lines with in the summer we married. The light is filled with the song the ground exhales once in 17 years. And we are here with the where and the knowledge of those years, understanding the song of locusts no better than then, knowing the future no more than they who give themselves so long to the dark. What can we say who grow older in love? Marriage is not made but in dark time, in the rhymes, the returns of song that mark time's losses. They open our eyes to the dark, and we marry again. To what listens. I come to it again and again, the thought of the wren opening his song here to no human ear, no woman to look up, no man to turn his head. The farm will sink then from all we have done and said. Beauty will lie fold on fold upon it. Foreseeing it so, I cannot withhold love. But from the height and distance of foresight, how well I like it as it is. The river shining, the bare trees on the bank, the house set snug as a stone in the hill's flank, the pasture behind it green. Its songs and loves throb in my head till like the wren, I sing to what listens again. Maybe up here when the river pools in the wintertime, it freezes over readily because it's small enough. But down where I live, there's lots of water, and it's deep, and for it to freeze takes a wonderful concatenation of events. The river has to be still, it has to be cold enough for long enough, and it just doesn't happen often enough, in my opinion. But anyway, this is a little poem in a celebration of walking on the river ice. A man could be a god if the ice wouldn't melt and he could stand the cold. The duty of the upstream end of a watershed, of course, is to hold water and keep it from coming down in too big a rush. Actually, there's certain circumstances in which a watershed can't hold water very well. One is when it's saturated, and the other is when it's frozen. The other is when it's under snow. Water going off over snow can make that water come off pretty fast. But what happens in a healthy watershed is not that it inevitably always keeps a flood from happening, but that it parcels the water out over a long period of time in rationed quantities. What happens now in the Kentucky River, because the watershed, thanks to our administrations over the last 100 years or so, has begun to behave a good deal more like a roof than a sponge. And the result is that we not only get high floods, but we get very fast what the technicians call drawdowns. And that's terribly destructive because the rise leaves the banks saturated with water, both unusually heavy and unusually soft. And when the river drops out from under them suddenly, then you get what the people at home call slips. That is, great scoops of the riverbank go out into the river and are carried away. And in that December flood several years ago, about an acre chunk slipped out of the middle of my place. And an event that took some getting used to. The slip. The river takes the land and leaves nothing. Where the great slip gave way in the bank and an acre disappeared, all human plans dissolve. An awful clarification occurs where a place was. Its memory breaks from what is known now, begins to drift. Where cattle grazed and trees stood, emptiness widens the air for bird flight, wind and rain. As before the beginning, nothing is there. Human wrong is in the cause, human ruin in the effect, but no matter, all will be lost, no matter the reason. Nothing having arrived will stay. The earth even is like a flower, so soon passeth it away. And yet this nothing is the seed of all, the clear eye of heaven, where all the worlds appear. Where the imperfect has departed, the perfect begins its struggle to return. The good gift begins again its descent. The Maker moves in the unmade, stirring the water until it clouds, dark beneath the surface, stirring and darkening the soul until pain perceives new possibility. There is nothing to do but learn and wait, return to work on what remains. Seed will sprout in the scar. Though death is in the healing, it will heal.
That was Wendell Berry reading poems here in Whitesburg at Appalshop in 1984. And what you just heard was a selection of clips from Wendell's reading that day. To hear more, you can check out appalshoparchive.org and search for Wendell Berry. We're going to take just a quick break here, but stay tuned after the break for more Mountain Talk here on WMMT. Welcome back to Mountain Talk here on WMMT. I'm Parker Hobson. For the second half of our show today, we'll switch gears from the craft of writing to crafts made by hand here in the region. One of those crafts, weaving, has a storied history in the mountains. Indigenous groups like the Cherokee and Shawnee developed robust weaving traditions using plant fibers. And then when European settlers colonized Appalachia starting in the 18th century, they brought their own styles of weaving. These days, fiber artists in the mountains are noticing an increased interest in weaving, and so they're trying to make the craft more accessible to beginners. And they're finding ways to connect in person for mentorship opportunities. From the Rural Remix podcast series from the Center for Rural Strategies, weaver and reporter Tony Doman has this story.
In Kingsport, Tennessee, the Overmountain Weavers Guild is hosting the final day of their Intro to Hand Weaving course. The course takes place each August, and this year there's about 15 students, ranging in age from 12 to over 70. We're in a big room filled with many looms. Guild member Marita Schwartz welcomes everyone to class.
But I know from sitting here that what you most want to do is go to your loom. So, we're going to let you weave for a while.
Marita is a seasoned weaver and one of the instructors.
Happy weaving this morning. Go ahead.
Students stand and shuffle to their looms. The loom is the primary tool in weaving. It holds a vertical set of threads under tension. Using foot pedals, the weaver can separate those threads to create an open space called a shed. Then the weaver uses a small device called a shuttle to pass another thread back and forth. This creates a pattern of interlocking sets of threads that eventually results in a piece of cloth. I've been in class all month. I started weaving 2 years ago and wanted the chance to grow my skills in person. Today, Marita's helping me with the finishing touches on a table runner that's fresh off the loom.
Hold it. Pull these out.
We're creating the fringe on each edge of the table runner by twisting and tying together the loose threads. Some of those loose thread ends are tangled.
So I got a big knot over here.
That's okay. That's part of your hemstitch. That'll help us.
Okay.
Louise Nuttall is a former guild president. She joined the group as a fiber producer and found a community of like-minded weavers. She says the Overmountain Weavers Guild started over 50 years ago.
It started in 72, essentially because a young, aspiring fiber artist was bound and determined to learn how to weave.
That young, aspiring weaver was Claudia Lee. She connected with an older, established weaver in the Kingsport area named Persis Grayson. Claudia and a few others decided they wanted to learn from Persis.
And Persis said, well, okay, we can meet at my house. And so the guild started with like 8 people sitting around in Persis Grayson's living room.
Today, the Guild is a place where fiber artists from around Northeast Tennessee and Southwest Virginia gather to share information on all things weaving. They host monthly meetings and workshops about different fiber arts. It's become an important source of community for artists in the region. The group has more than 80 members. However, Louise says there's a key limitation.
When I was working full-time, I was not able to come to the meetings. Now we have YouTube, but before YouTube, it was really, like I learned from my grandmother.
For me, in 2024, I was living abroad in Canada, and I stumbled upon an intro to weaving class that was hosted in person. From there, I was hooked. When I got back to Southwest Virginia, I wanted to keep learning. I turned to YouTube, books, and online classes, but was yearning for an opportunity to learn offline and build community. That's when I found the Overmountain Weavers Guild. The Guild hosts this month-long class on the weekends to better accommodate people's work schedules. You don't have to be a member to take the class. The in-person format has helped inspire a new crop of weavers.
When I started weaving, I expected to like it, but I've enjoyed it so much more, and every new thing I do, I just get so excited about.
Mark Archibald is from Marion, Virginia. He took the class last year, then joined the Guild and returned this year as one of the instructors. He says learning from other people in person has been invaluable.
You learn so much more from others. And you learn by doing things and making mistakes, but you've got to have others. And every time I'm around another weaver, I'm trying to look over their shoulder and see, how do you do that?
In addition to creating opportunities to learn in person, other weavers are focused on making the craft more accessible to younger learners. One of those people is Erin Miller. She's the director of weaving at Berea College in Kentucky. She says that while hand weaving has a rich history here in Appalachia, interest in the craft has waxed and waned over time.
Craft has had such interesting ebbs and flows, and especially weaving. Weaving can feel a little bit inaccessible because it requires large equipment.
Erin's in her 30s and has been weaving for the past 16 years. One of her primary goals in education is to make the craft accessible to the generations coming up behind her.
I'm on the board of the Hand Weavers Guild of America, which is primarily older hobby weavers. And that's changing. And part of the reason that I'm on the board is because I'm really interested in seeing that demographic change.
And Erin is seeing that demographic change. Most of her students are college-aged and come from diverse backgrounds. While Erin's passionate about teaching the obvious skills related to weaving, like color theory and dressing a loom, she says there's something else students get from her classes.
what they're actually getting is what I like to call hard skills, not soft skills anymore. So things like creative problem solving, communication, effective leadership, and that's the real product. And the secondary product is a handwoven object.
Erin believes we're in a period of revived interest in weaving here in Appalachia. She says it has to do with what's going on at a societal level.
It feels like a really kind of chaotic and tumultuous time. And we as human beings are trying as much as possible to find joy in our lives. And there are a lot of people that find joy and meaning in physically making something. The output of energy, the physical output of energy, I think is something that we seek when we are in kind of chaotic and tumultuous times.
Deborah Prescott is a weaver and fiber artist based in Bristol, Virginia. She agrees with Erin that weaving seems to be a kind of antidote that people are seeking out in current times.
It is interesting how when people are drawn to pick it up, they sense that, the connection to the past. And that gives a feeling of rootedness, which is something that we have so lost in our current way of life.
Deborah's also a spinner and often makes her own thread for weaving projects. Inside her living room, she sits down at one of her 3 spinning wheels.
You operate this wheel by treadling. If you've ever seen an old treadle sewing machine, it's kind of the same idea. You treadle.
The spinning wheel is made out of wood. This one has a big wheel about the size of a car tire in the center. On the floor are 2 foot pedals, which operate a lever. To treadle, Deborah uses her feet to press the pedals, which spin the wheel.
And the wheel goes round.
Deborah takes a piece of fluffy sheep's wool that's been cleaned and combed. This processed wool is called roving. Deborah dyed the roving with goldenrod, a native plant. As she treadles and the wheel spins, the light green roving twists into a fine thread.
And then the thread goes through this hole, which is called an orifice, and is taken up and wrapped around the bobbin, which looks a lot like a giant thread spool.
Deborah grew up in the Chicago suburbs, but she's lived in Bristol for over 30 years now. During that time, she's seen more people in the region become interested in weaving.
It really enhances the quality of your life. It's a way of grounding, it's a way of centering. They're very contemplative crafts. They restore a sense of balance.
About a year ago, someone connected me with Deborah, and she happens to live just 10 minutes from me. I started visiting her at her home, and since then, she's become my mentor.
Deborah, what do you enjoy most about becoming my mentor in this craft journey?
To be able to share these things with you, to have somebody who is so on the same wavelength and enthusiastic and appreciative has been so validating and so encouraging. It has just really shown me how much each generation needs the other. That's the thing that you find is the older generation feels so lost when they realize that all of this knowledge that they have accumulated is now thought to be irrelevant. So to find someone who appreciates what you know, what you've learned, what you value, and wants to carry that forward, that is a treasure.
Well, I'm so excited for the future and working with you. Yeah, it feels like a good place to end it, doesn't it?
I think so.
That story was reported by Tony Doman for The Rural Remix, a podcast from the Center for Rural Strategies. It was produced and edited by Nicole Musgrave and Susanna Brown. Finally, we'll close our show today with another kind of craft that's long been done by hand here in the region. Our last story today takes us to Westall, Tennessee, home to fiddlemaker Gene Horner. For more than 70 years, Gene built instruments that traveled across the country, from Carnegie Hall to California, from the Grand Ole Opry to the Smithsonian. And 2 factors shaped Gene's fiddles. The first was his deep roots in the Cumberland Plateau, and the second was his fascination with the great Italian violin makers of the 17th and 18th centuries. Gene died last year at age 91 as an acknowledged master of his craft. But reporter Lisa Kaufman interviewed Gene at his workshop in 2023, and later she attended his memorial service in Westall. To close our show today, also from the Rural Remix series, Kaufman brings us this story of how Gene came to be known as the Stradivari of the Cumberlands. And all of the fiddle tunes in this piece are played on Gene Horner fiddles.
In 1951, Gene Horner arrived in Washington, D.C. He was 18, on leave from the Navy, and headed to his first museum ever. He'd come for fiddles.
The train station, you could see the Smithsonian, and I went over to look at fiddles, and boy, they got them there, you know.
Gene's obsession with fiddles had started a few years earlier at age 14. He'd found a broken fiddle in his grandfather's cabin in Westall, the cabin where Gene and his father before him were born. By the time Gene got that fiddle glued back together, he was hooked. 4 years later, he hoped the Smithsonian could help him figure out how fiddles were made. But that wasn't the case.
You see, I didn't know enough. I was looking at a forest, but I couldn't see the trees.
Months later, Gene was reading in his bunk on the Navy ship, and an advertisement in Popular Mechanics caught his eye: how to build a Stradivarius. He could order a manual for making a violin designed more than 200 years before by Antonio Stradivari, one of the world's greatest luthiers. Now is probably time to explain the difference between a fiddle and a violin. There isn't one. Not really. The difference lies in the way you string them, the kind of music you play on them. Or as Gene would later say, if I'm selling one to you, it's a violin. Violins cost more. In 1951, that Stradivarius manual offered details of fiddle making he'd hungered to understand.
I've always been a great believer in books. And when I seen that little book advertised, I just ordered it. They sent it to the ship, and I'd study that thing.
After the Navy, Gene came home to Westall, determined to make fiddles like that. Problem was, there was no one to teach him. So Gene kept reading. He read every book he could get his hands on about great European luthiers from centuries before. The Italian masters inspired Gene the most, especially Stradivari and his contemporary Giuseppe Guarneri. Gene pored over the details of their violins. Longtime friend and Grammy-winning fiddle player Kenny Sears says Gene had to rely on illustrations to learn his craft.
Gene was very self-educated. He didn't have a lot of formal education, but he read all the time. And he looked at pictures and he studied them.
And Gene began designing fiddles based on those pictures. He made his first fiddle the year he got out of the Navy. He said it left a lot to be desired.
I made one that year. It'd give you nightmares to look at it. But I was learning.
He just learned it the hard way, and he told me that he burned up a lot of fiddles in his wood stove in the shop. It just wouldn't, if they didn't suit him, he'd just make kindling out of them.
Making a living was tough in Westall, and Gene and his wife Ann had 3 children to raise. To pay the bills, Ann worked at a sewing factory in another town, while Gene put in 12-hour days making cabinets and studying fiddles on the side. Gene's son Bruce recalls what a long shot it was for his father to earn a living making fiddles.
Somebody making a fiddle in Westall? That's about as far out thing as you could think of to do around here.
But Gene kept at it. It was painstaking work, especially without a mentor or money to back him. He had to improvise. Gene built his own workshop out of wood from an abandoned hotel that he bought and demolished. He made his own luthier tools, gouges and finger planes and chisels. Bruce says his dad was self-reliant to the core.
I mean, that's what kind of man he was. He didn't, I don't know, it's just like you don't need money, you just need to be able to make something yourself.
In between building cabinets, Gene taught himself the ins and outs of fiddle making. He learned to carve scrolls, tuning pegs, all the delicate arching of a fiddle body. The work was not just demanding, it was unforgiving, as Kenny Sears points out.
There must be 1,000 things that has to be done to make one of these, from splitting the log to varnishing and rubbing it out. And if you just get one of them wrong, it ruins the whole thing.
In time, that hard work paid off. Gene's fiddles stopped going in the wood stove.
It took several of them, about 10, I guess, and lo and behold, I made one once. I've got it.
Gene was particular about the wood he used. The high-end violin world believed that you couldn't make a good violin from American wood. Gene disagreed. He knew the Cumberland Plateau forests and the loggers who worked there. And when their saws buzzed into a piece of curly maple fine enough for a Gene Horner fiddle, they called him. Longtime friend Mike Whitehead remembers Gene's close connection with local loggers.
He had special friends that would stop the sawmill operation long enough to roll that log off and move on to another one and call Gene, and he would come and sometimes buy the whole log.
Sometimes loggers would bring Gene into the forest to see a special tree they'd found.
So he knew the wood from the time it was a living tree until it was a finished instrument.
Gene made other instruments, mandolins and banjos, even a cello. But in his mind, fiddle was king. Word got out about how good his fiddles were. Professional musicians started finding their way to Westall. Kenny Sears remembers his first sight of the shop. He came with a former bandmate, and they were awed by all the fiddles.
We started tuning them up, and we play, I like this one over here, and I like this one over here, And we decided we'd never seen that many good fiddles in one place in our whole life.
One striking quality of Gene's fiddles was their balance. Clear and bright on the high notes, warm and rich on the low. It's a quality Kenny appreciates. Kenny's classically trained. He played with the Dallas Symphony Orchestra before his bluegrass career.
You don't get that low end out of a lot of fiddles, Usually when you get the low end is good, the high end is not. To get a balanced fiddle, Gene knew how to do that, and he did it very well.
By the 1970s, Gene was finally making instruments full-time. He wasn't getting rich. I make about a cornbread living off this, Gene liked to say. But in the years that followed, he gained recognition. Professionals toured with his instruments. Gene became a staple artist at Dollywood's annual Harvest Fair. And 3 decades after he saw that fine violin collection in the Smithsonian, Gene made it back to the museum himself, demonstrating his craft during their Folklife Festival. In 2009, he earned the Governor's Arts Award in Tennessee. Gene didn't slow down. He kept turning out fiddles, somewhere between 200 and 500 in his career. He never really kept count. Then in 2022, a major blow came. Gene lost his wife, Anne, who'd supported his dream of making fine instruments all those years. 2 years later, Gene's health began to fail too. He died in January 2025.
Just want to thank you, Lord, for every time.
It's springtime in Westall, and the forsythia and redbuds are in full bloom. After a year of being mostly shuttered, Gene's shop is open again, this time for his memorial.
Always been there.
Close friends are gathered for one last round of music in the shop and to share memories of a man who changed their lives. They knew Gene as a master luthier and also as a generous teacher. 2 of Gene's apprentices, Casey Meikle and Austin Derryberry, remember how they found their way to Gene's shop.
I had heard of Gene before. I had never met him before, though. And so walking in here, it was just like walking into this magical land,
Really stepping in here was kind of the spark to understand that people did this kind of thing for a living.
Over the next year, Gene mentored Casey and Austin. He'd show them a step, send them home, and teach them the next step when they were ready. They still laugh about a particular piece of advice he gave.
I think he said the first 10 or 20 that you make, you should probably just throw in the fire.
Yeah.
Well, he said after that, you'll be getting somewhere.
Austin went on to win the National Grandmaster Old Time Fiddling Championship, and he built more fiddles with Gene through a state arts program. Austin recalls being amazed at how, after almost 70 years of making fiddles, Gene's love of the craft never waned.
His body was obviously here, but his mind was always somewhere else. He was always thinking of the next fiddle.
Gene spent the last months of his life in a nursing home. His longtime friend Keith Williams remembers how Gene stayed focused on fiddles.
He said, "I'd like to get back out at the shop and make one more fiddle," he said.
And Gene stayed as obsessed as ever with Stradivarius violins. Sometimes Gene and Keith joked about what they'd do if they could get their hands on a real Stradivarius.
And I said, "Boy, I'd like to play that thing once." "What'd you like to do, Gene?" He said, "I'd like to take my pocket knife and take the top off of it and see what's in the middle of that thing." Oh.
But here's the thing. During his career, Gene really did get to hold a Stradivarius. Just once. And no, he didn't take a knife to it. When Gene turned 70, his friend Kenny Sears took him to meet the concertmaster of the Nashville Symphony Orchestra. She had a Stradivarius on loan.
When she pulled it out, Gene's eyes lit up. He was like a kid in a candy store, and he studied it for the longest time. I could just see he was recording every knife stroke.
Kenny had brought one of Gene's fiddles, too, and Gene got to hear his fiddle played next to a Stradivarius.
And when she played them back to back, they sounded the same. And when I played them back to back, they sounded the same. So he was making fiddles every bit as good as Stradivari.
Gene never forgot. Here he is after his 90th birthday in his busy, noisy shop, the last year it was open, still talking about that Stradivarius moment.
I think of it every day, how beautiful it was. The craftsmanship was just a perfection that a machine could never get. And yet, you could see little flaws around. One F-hole was set just a little higher. One side of the scroll was carved just a little lower, but it didn't take away from its beauty. And all 300 years of patina formed on it. And just think of the shiniest thing you can think of, and it would outdo it.
Now, at the memorial in his shop, Gene's friends honor him with music, playing tune after soaring tune. It's a fitting tribute to the man who became known as the Stradivari of the Cumberlands.
That story was reported by Lisa Kaufman for The Rural Remix, a podcast from the Center for Rural Strategies. It was produced and edited by Nicole Musgrave. And that's it for Mountain Talk today. Thanks so much for listening. For WMMT, I'm Parker Hobson.